Welcome. This is Panda Consulting's ArcGIS Parcel Fabric workshop. I'm Frank Conkling, and I'm glad you're here today. On this workshop, this is a continuation of a series that we started last month, and we'll go through lesson by lesson and build upon the techniques and sort of the fundamental lessons that we've had before. And this workshop, we're going to focus on one and only one thing. That's going to be records. What are they? How do they work? How do you use them? What's the nuances when you get involved in them? Those sorts of things. So hopefully it's something that's going to prove interesting to you. So let's first go over a couple things, who Panda Consulting is. We are a professional services firm located in South Florida. We've been as your business partners since we started. You want to find out more about us, go to our website, pandaconsulting.com, and find out about us, or the homepage. If you want a list of upcoming events, if you go to our events section, we'll actually give you a current listing, a current calendar of this. We try not to go and schedule things too far in advance, because the technology is changing and the requests that we get are different. So at least look every month to see what's coming out. If you don't like the calendar view, you can go over to the workshops, and there's actually an events page there, and that will give you a linear listing of what workshops we've had previously together with upcoming workshops. And as you scroll down, you can actually access both a YouTube version of our workshop video, or if you really want to look at it, we have a high definition version that you can download and look at later. Again, we do have a Panda Consulting YouTube page. You go ahead and look at, and it will go and show you everything that we've recorded in the last couple of years that deal with ArcGIS Pro and the Parcel Fabric, the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric. Hopefully you'll enjoy this. Hopefully you'll reach out to us if you have any questions about the Parcel Fabric, if you want any help with it, you want to prototype it. We're here to help you with that. Please let us know. All right, before we start, let me just go and point out that we are hoping to get some interactivity here, so that while I'm going through things and while I'm describing them and identifying what they do and how they work, if you have any questions or if you have any comments, please put them over in the chat window. Chris is actually moderating it, and he'll be listening and watching, and anything, he'll either answer them himself or he'll go and interrupt me, and we'll see if we can expand on that a little bit further. Please feel free to do that. We're finding some of the more meaningful discussion is coming out of these questions. All right. So with that, let's start. And let's look at just sort of from the very beginning what a record is. Last month, we talked about the Parcel Fabric and how the Parcel Fabric actually works, what it's actually doing. And the fact that the Parcel Fabric actually has a series of, let's look at the properties here. It has specific parcel types, and the Parcel Fabric goes and keeps track of changes that occur to these parcel types. And the way it keeps track of this is this organizing feature class. An organizing feature class is the records feature class. And you'll see it if we're looking over here in the catalog pane. We actually see here a records feature class. It is a Polygon feature class. There's nothing special about this other than the fact that it has several relationships built into it. For example, we can look and see that that records feature class actually has a relationship class. That relationship class, let's go and open this up and look at it and see that that relationship class says that there is a relationship between block polygons, in this case, and records. And the way that works is it's a one-to-many relationship. Like one record can have many values in here, and it utilizes the origin name for the primary key is records, and it uses the global ID, and the foreign key or the key that's actually in the records feature class is created by record. All right. So in other words, what this does is that if you have an active record, the parcel fabric will mark everything that you create or everything you delete with the information about what record created it or what record marked it as historic or deleted it. It keeps track of that, and that's how it understands what goes with what. So let's look a little bit further at this. Again, that's for every single feature class that's within your parcel types. All right. So let's look at these records for a little bit more and look at the data design of the records feature class. It has a standard object IDs. It has a name field in which we identify what that name is. It has a global ID. Everything inside the parcel fabric has a global ID that's utilized to go and identify it uniquely across all the components of the fabric. There is an optional attribute field that's built into the parcel fabric called record type, and we'll explore that a little bit more, in which you can identify what the record is used to track. It can be a type of document, it could be an action, or it can be a person. It's up to you. It's part of your design. And that's one of the benefits of the ArcGIS parcel fabric, is that design is extremely flexible, and you go and design it and build it so it works within your system. They're not forcing you to go and adopt a different system. And then there's things such as what information, when was that record recorded, or when was that official document, if you're tracking it that way, was recorded. And then it actually does some tracking, what the creation date of it was. There's also some other components in here. How many parcels, how many different types of parcels are part of an individual record? And we'll explore that a little bit more. And then new at version 5 is not just your current parcels, but how many retired parcels are associated with that one record. And then the rest of it's just the normal shape, length, and area, and the editor tracking components on here. All right, let's look at this record type. By default, it is a long data type, and it's a numeric value, but there is no, by default, there is no, in fact, domain for that. We've actually gone and created one for this sample set. And what we've done is we've built it so that we might be tracking the type of a document that's being tracked or used for the transactions, whether it's a meets and bounds description or an aliquot description, whether there's a combination or a merging of parcels, whether it's an annexation, a subdivision plat, or just miscellaneous. Maybe there's an abandonment of a road or something of that sort. And again, this is completely up to each individual organization as far as the design, what you put in there, what you leave out. And I've seen several very, very different types of solutions in here. Like I said, some of them that I think are rather ingenious. Some people will go and put in here an actual document, what type of a document, whether it's a deed of conveyance, whether it's a warranty deed or a special deed, or whether it's an original patent, or whether or not it's an easement, those sorts of things. So it can be used in many different ways. Another way in which you can actually take this record table and use it for other things is you can actually build in some hyperlinks so that you can have an attribute field here, which is a URL that goes over to an internal system or an external system. You, for example, could have this set up so that you're linking over to a clerk of court's official record database, and you could actually put the search string in that URL, so that when you're going back and looking at a record in the future, you could be able to click on it and actually see the actual document that's being referenced in that record. There's lots of ways to do this. Again, there's a lot of flexibility. And this is one of those areas where you really want to think, how are you going to organize your data, your parcel data, as you make this transition out of just pure cartography into a digital curator of land record information. That's, again, it's a different mindset once you move into the parcel fabric. So let's look at this a little bit more. How does this work? What does this do? Another thing we want to look at is the fact that inside the parcel fabric, there's two different ways to work within your data. One is with a record, and that record will go and track things that are being built, things that are being deleted. Or you might actually go in and not use records and do what's called a quality-driven workflow. Quality-driven workflow really is about not really tracking things, but cleaning things up, taking care of issues that were associated with your parcels, whether it be misalignment issues, whether it be excessive vertices, just cleaning up the data. That's a quality-driven workflow. Today, we're going to focus on records and what you do with records and how the record actually works. One more element we want to go and introduce is this thing called a heads-up display. This heads-up display, if you have a parcel fabric in your table of contents, that heads-up display is how you interact with them, how you go and create records, how you modify records, how you delete records, how you go and interact and look at what features are part of that record. So it sort of is the key to finding all of the relationships that are going out there. And in 2.9, the heads-up display has a gearbox here. In 3.0, that icon is actually going to change to an options icon instead on here. But in order to go and do this, we can start by first creating a record. All right. And again, a record will allow us to go and track what's created. It will go and organize everything so that it all goes with this. All right. So we'll create a record. Now, if you'll note here, there are no required fields. It automatically goes, when you create a record, automatically goes and stamps it with the username, the date, and the time. But that's just to put a value in there. Normally, you would say, okay, this is going to be a demo number 101. And what type of record? Now, again, this type of record is up to you as far as the design and how you actually want to interact with it. We often will have, for example, different requests or different work orders that we'll have, and we'll go and use that as the request type or the record type and track it so that we can track everything that happened under one work order. That's another option for you. In this case, let's just say this is just a simple meets and bounds description using this domain for this individual county's design. The recorded date. This is interesting in that you can take that to, you can interpret that to mean that it's looking for the actual recordation date of the document that you're going to be tracking. Or it can be meant to be, when was that work order issued? Or when did you actually do it? Since you're actually, it's got editor tracking turned on, you really don't need it for the date at which you made an edit, but you might think about how you use this. Again, there's flexibility in the design for you. So let's just go and put, today is the 16th. By the way, let me go and show you something. If I type in today's date, it then will go and store. Let me go and do that. It will then store the date and actually track it as far as what time it is. There isn't a whole lot of difference between doing that and clicking on the calendar, all right, or going and saying today, it's all going to be the same thing when you go and do it. So just be aware, it's really not just timing or not just capturing the date, it's actually capturing also the timestamp. From that, because we've got nothing else, and this is a brand new one, nothing else is needed. And again, there really is no recorded or required fields associated with that. When I created that record, you can automatically see over here, that record now is going to start tracking what's going on. So this is an active record on here. Let's look at the attribute table to see if we can go a little bit deeper and see how this works. All right, I'm going to go all the way to the bottom on here. And in fact, maybe I just need to go to D for demo, maybe. I bet I actually did already go and just do a selection here where the name contains the text demo. And there it is here. So what I wanted to show you is that every single feature in the parcel fabric that's associated with the parcel has a global ID. But the most important global ID of all of them is the one that's associated with the record, because it's this value here that we're going to start looking for and watching. As we start going and creating things now with an active record, it will actually start stamping this value here, this global ID in everything that we create. So if I go to create on here, and by the way, let me just point something out to you. By default, your create features is usually sorted according to groupings or the grouping layers that appear in your table of contents. For a parcel fabric, it's often better not to group them that way, but to rather to group them by geometry type. Because that way, if you're doing meets and bounds, you're almost always going to be making lines. The normal routine is you create a record, create the lines, create the seeds, build them. So if that's the case, why go and sort it where you sort it according to layer and you have to search through here where it all is? It's always more efficient or lazier to go and have all those line feature classes, all those line feature templates in a single grouping. So from here now, I can tell it what I want to create. And by the way this works, I tell it what type of line I'm going to create, and then it will go and wind up building for us a corresponding polygon type. So let's just look at the parcel lines, the tax parcel line. And I'm going to go and create one here. And when I do that, I'm going to go here and I'm going to look. And as I go through here, I will see that while it has its own global ID down here, it automatically has its own unique global ID. It also, the parcel fabric as part of that active record is tracing it and actually giving me the same record of that demo. Let me see if I can do this in a way that this one here, it will give me this same global ID that's on the record here. Now, if I go and turn off my active record, in other words, I don't have it active anymore, when I'm going and creating my next line, if I look at it, that line is no longer being stamped with the global ID of the record because the record is not active. So it's critical that you have an active record if you're going to be using parcels and looking to use the parcel fabric. Notice also that while my active record is not active or not enabled, several of my parcel tools have been disabled. They are no longer active. When I reactivate it, these tools will again become active. So let's follow through. As I create another line, that line automatically gets marked, and this line automatically gets marked. So I now have 4 lines. All right. Those 4 lines, not all of them are coded according to this record. So if I attempt to go with the next step and say, create a record for me, or create a seed, which is, it's a way to go and determine whether or not the lines that we've drawn form a closed polygon, it's going to fail and it's not going to create a seed. Because in here, if I use my heads up display and use one of the functions in here and say, select the features that are part of this current record, it will tell me the features, the lines that are part of this active record do not form a closed polygon. That's why create seeds wasn't working. But if I go in here and I select this line, and I'm only going to select that line, I have a function here inside my heads up display that says, take whatever you've selected now and assign it. Now watch here, when I do that to this line, let's go and scroll down a little bit so that we can see it. There's a created by record on here. Right now it's null. When I go and tell it to go ahead and assign it, it automatically goes and populates that with the global ID of the active record, this global ID right here. All right. So I can actually now go and clear it off. It still is all related to that. It's all that those relationship class are valid at the moment. So the function that I have now is say, okay, I've drawn some lines. Let's go and see if they actually form a closed polygon. And that is the create seeds. And it's actually going to form a small little polygon here, which when I use the build function, the build tool, it's going to take that seed and expand it so that these lines are going to be used as the boundaries of this polygon. All right. Those are the boundaries of the polygon. It now has selected that polygon that it created. And that polygon now has exactly the same created by record value as the record, the active record on there. So let that sink in a little bit. The key to working with the ArcGIS parcel fabric is to recognize that the record and that global ID on the record is the organizing component. Everything that's associated with a single parcel should be connected together using the global ID of the record polygon. Matter of fact, if I go and turn on, let's go and turn this off and turn on my record polygons, I'll actually see that I have a polygon here. As I zoom in a little bit more, I'm looking at the underlying one too. I actually have a polygon here, which has the name of it, what the record type was, and the date on there for me. And this is a polygon. Let's go and turn everything else off. That's the polygon outline for that one individual record. Again, it's really nothing more than a polygon feature class that has a series of relationship classes built into it. And that parcel fabric that parcel fabric object, that programming object, actually is the one that keeps track of whether or not you've got an active record, and it's going to make sure it marks everything, make sure it it goes and selects everything, make sure it assigns everything. That's the Parcel Fabric object that's actually going and handling all of those tools and all of those functions inside of there. All right, let me go back here, turn on these layers again. I now have a full-blown parcel. And if I look and go and do and say, select everything that's associated with this active record, it will go and show me that I have 4 points that are associated with. And if I click on these points, I can actually see there's the created by record. On every one of them, they're all the same. My lines, if I scroll down, here is my created by record value that's stored on those lines. And my polygon, here is the created by record for that. So this allows us to go and organize around a central object, a central feature, and use that to go and figure out what features are built as a result of this one record out there. What does the record contain? What is it part of? What is it not part of? All right, let's look at some of the other functionality we have before we explore a little bit more about the nuances of records. So if I go to Manage Records, we'll bring up a pane over here, and it will show me on there my active record. All right, there's my active record. I can actually right click and say zoom. What this is actually doing is this is actually using the polygon extent of that active record. This polygon here, it's using that polygon and basically is zooming to that polygon. I could actually go in here and I could have said pan to it, or I can select this record. If it wasn't, if down here, it's not selected at the moment, I can say, select that record. And in fact, it is now my selected record here. Other things that I can do is if I click in here, I can set something that's in here as my active record. I could also go and select the features in this record, which is the same thing. It goes through and checks to see what has exactly the same values in that created by records as the object ID of this. By the way, this little warning just telling me that my records aren't visible at the moment. That's what that's doing. So that's one of the tools we have. I also can go in here and go to properties. And I can actually change some of these values and say, well, wait a minute, that's really not demo number 1. That's actually record number 1 in here. And when I change it here, you'll note it actually automatically changes it over there. So the thing to remember here is that that name field on the record is not unique. It is not permanent. It is just another attribute for it. The only component of this that's actually static and can't be changed is the global ID. And that's where everything is related to that global ID. Oftentimes people will go and do their initial migration and create a temporary name on there, in which they'll go back later and clean it up and put actually real values on there that correspond to it. But in order to get it into the fabric, they'll go and they'll put some sort of temporary name or a name that means something to them when they do that. Same way with meets and bounds, what type it is, the recorded date, all the rest of this. Now, interesting, one of the things that it created was how many parcels are part of this record, and it keeps track of that. The number of polygons that are associated with this one record, it will keep track of for me. All right, let's look at this manage panes and see, well, what else can we do with this? I can actually go and say, well, show me all of the records that's inside my current display. and it will show me everything that's in here, all the different tax parcel records, all the other records. This was actually a record that was migrated over. I could tell because of the coding in here. This is an object ID, and this is probably a lot inside of here. If I were to go and select it and say, go ahead and just select there it is, that's the lot in here. If I go down here, maybe there's, what is this thing here? I can select that those are actually points inside of there that are part of it. So again, some of it is select the record. There is the tax parcel that's associated with that record number there. So I can go in here and make some selections in here. One of the really interesting things in here is that ArcGIS Pro has a really nice find function. It's actually called locate now. And that locate function here allows you to locate things according to some of these settings, he's presetting, or you can go and locate according to a specific layer. All right. And then a specific field in a layer. So you can get really, intense as far as what you're looking for. The problem is sometimes you don't know where that's structured or where it's actually at. This is really very fast. It's a nice tool. However, if you're working within a parcel fabric, here's an even better one. So let's say that I was looking for, and I don't even know what some of these values are in here. Subdivision layer. Let's see what we have here. My lot layers, I don't have any in here. So let's go back here to manage. And let's just say I was looking for something that has 001 in it. All right. Real quickly, I could go in here and it will look through every record to find everything that has 001 in it very quickly, much faster, believe it or not, than the actual locate one does, because you don't have to set anything. It doesn't have to be exact match or not exact match. This is all sort of a fuzzy logic to see what this is. And when I'm working, looking to be as efficient as possible, I will usually go in there and use the manage records to search for something rather than using locate to go and find specifically where it is, especially if I don't know how my client has actually gone and attributed something. For example, public land survey system, a lot of people put section, township, range in the same, a lot of people separate it. This allows me to go and search for them in a different way. All right, so I can say I can automatically go and find all the records in my current one, or I can go and find an individual parcel and I can say, show me the record from this selected feature, and it will show me the record that's associated with that. And if I have to go and work on this, all I have to do is go over to this button here and say, set that as my current record, and it will automatically go and do this. Chris, I see that Mark has something.
Has a question in the chat.
Yeah.
He says, I'm not sure how to word this, but can you split and explode records? For example, we may want to split a single record for a township into 36 records for each section.
Interesting. There is currently no way to actually split records. What you would wind up having to do is create the two new records and assigning those features to the two records. But let's hold that thought for about 5 more minutes, because I'm going to show you some really interesting things about this as you move forward. All right. It's a good question, Mark. I'm not blowing it off. I'm just saying, let's hold that, because there's some nuances with records that might change the way you think. All right. So let's go back here. Let's select this one parcel. Let's go back here and say, okay, select the record according to the one that I have, and just go and mark that as my current record. There it is. Let's go through here to manage, so we can say all the records in the extent, all selected records that if we actually select them from our table, or we can say from the selected feature, which is one of my favorite ones, we can also say, show me all the records that were created in the last 7 days, because this is doing editor tracking. So in this case, I actually haven't been working in here for a while, nor will it do probably last 31 days because I haven't worked in here. This is a demo one. So, but it is editor tracking. So it will say what was created in the last 7 days, what was created in the last 31 days. You can actually do that query and say, just show me what I recently did in case I need to do that. Finally, you can also do a query in which you can build an expression in which you can go and find out on any of these, what, let's say this contains the text of, in this case, record in here. All right, and there's the ones that have records in it for here. All right, notice it has record lowercase, but not record uppercase. So I think that might in fact be case sensitive on there. All right, so the manage records function is actually, once you get to use this a little bit more, you find, again, if you're working in a parcel fabric, that you start using the locate tool less and less. Locate tool is a great tool, but if you're working in a parcel fabric, this is a tool that will really let you run through and find this as quickly as possible if your records have valid names on them. If you can identify what you're actually looking for. This is a much faster way to go and organize and to work, much more efficient. So let me go and now talk about what I was starting to talk about with, or what I wanted to introduce here with Mark. Let's go and create a new record. By the way, that created one parcel on here. And let's just record 2. All right, and that's just, yeah, I'll do that. Again, all of this is superfluous. It's not really required, but let's just do it anyway and create the record. All right, there's our record number 2. Again, remember that we can go and create parcel lines. All right, we can create parcel lines. We can say, show me everything that's associated with this parcel. All right. And let's get out of that. I can say, create seeds from all the lines that are connected to this. Let's undo that. Let's go to edit, undo here. Let me go and do something here. Put this back the way I like to see it. So I have undo here. I get rid of those seeds. Let's create some more lines. All right, I've created more lines. Again, just so that we know these are all the lines that are associated with this record. There they are. Go in here and here's the individual lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines in here. I can say create seeds. There's my seeds. I can say create builds. Now, the reason why I wanted to do it this way is to show you that the parcel fabric with the current design has 2 ways of handling lines. If in fact you build one parcel at a time, or I apologize, I'm going to drop down into surveying and legal terminology. If in fact the transactions that you're going and tracking are sequential conveyances, one, and then another one, and then another one, all being discrete conveyances that occur over a period of time. The parcel fabric works perfect for this, in that this record has a one set of lines, and those lines only are associated with that one parcel that was part of it. However, if the transaction that you are tracking, if that record is what's called a simultaneous conveyance, which would be a subdivision plat or the public land survey system, those were all what's called simultaneous conveyances. They all occurred at one time. The parcels, those polygons, were created with the adoption or approval of that subdivision plat or the approval of that original government land office township plat. They were approved and boom, they were created all at one time. By design, those things are only supposed to have one parcels between them, one line between them. So again, in here, we're only supposed to have one line here. Well, if we built this one by one by one by one, there would be two lines. There would be one line associated with this record and one line associated with this record. So, and this is a question we often get, should we in fact create a record and have everything inside of a subdivision as part of that one record? Or should we do it as, okay, do the subdivision boundary as one, then do the lots as one, do blocks as a different one, those sorts of things. And the reality is, if you think about how these parcels were created, again, there's a difference between a tax parcel, which is primarily a sequential conveyance. There's one deed of conveyance and then another deed of conveyance and then another deed of conveyance, so that the parent parcel gets one thing taken out and what's left is the parent parcel. And then it gets a different thing taken out and what's left is the parent parcel. Those things occur over a period of time. And each of those transactions should have their own set of lines, because it will go and identify how things were built, how things were conveyed out from the original. But some of the layers that we are building, the lot layer, these are divisions within a subdivision, or what we commonly refer to in the local government information model as conveyance divisions inside of a simultaneous conveyance. Simultaneous conveyance means it was created all at one time, and you should only have one line between them. So if we go in here and look on here and look at this, get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of those polygons, we have one line, only one line. And that one line goes and defines the boundaries between these two adjacent parcels. All right, these two adjacent parcels, and it reflects, according to that record, that all three of these were created at the same time. So the parcel fabric has this concept where you can have what's called overlapping lines, where each record has its own set of lines, or you have the concept of a shared line model in which all parcels that were created with a single record share the lines that were part of it, so that you could have multiple adjacent parcels having this exact same line for them, which, by the way, is legally the way they were defined. There was one line between the sections, and there was one line between conveyance division lots inside of a subdivision. So, Mark, to answer your question, okay, and I know that was, we went halfway around the world to get to that point, but to answer your question, should you take a township and split it up and actually go and have each individual section being its own record in there. And it depends on how you're looking at it. If you're looking at it from a cartographer standpoint, or if you're looking at it from basically a land record standpoint. Because the reality is, from the legal standpoint, from that record or land record information standpoint, that township plat was one single subdivision of all the lands contained within that township. And that from a an object model standpoint, there should only be one line between the two sections. There should not be one line for one section, for section number 1, and another one for section number 2. There should only be one line between them. So hopefully that gave you a little bit more to think about. And I can tell you that often what will happen is when you're migrating in, if you're migrating your data in, when you go and have just sort of take it all in, some of the migration scripts that ArcGIS has put together has an option to say, hey, if I have two lines that are exactly the same, they have the same shape, same length, delete if there's an identical line on top of them within a specific parcel type. Delete identical is one of the options when you're going to go and migrate here. If I go in here and go to my toolbox and I go to parcel tools and I go to administration, go to upgrade. Come on, here it is here, delete identical overlapping lines. And I'm going to tell you that that might not be the best thing to do if you've got tax parcels. If, however, you're migrating lot lines, yeah, that might be a good way to do it. Because again, you want to think long-term about, are these in fact, again, dropping down into surveying terminology, is this a sequential conveyance that I'm tracking, or is this simultaneous conveyances? Long way around. Sorry, it took a while. Chris, so you said Tracy. The question is, does it cause issues if you have two sets of lines for different records when you do your least squares adjustment process, or do they just have to make sure everything is included in the adjustment? That's a great, good nuance in there. The reality is the least squares adjustment looks at, stop before I answer that. When you have two different competing distances in here in a least squares adjustment, it analyzes each of those as being part of the redundant observations on here. Least squares adjustment goes and looks at the information that's stored on there and attempts to go and identify what the smallest adjustment that can occur on the individual overall collection of lines that you have, to move them so that it removes as much of the variance as you can, as much of the inaccuracy inside that. So that if you have one line that comes this way, and that line says that this is supposed to be 100 feet long, and you have another line coming the other way that says, no, that line's supposed to be 110 feet long, least squares adjustment will go and take that into account. Why would we have those two different distances? Because a legal description really is attempting to go and convey to you where they think that monument is. We have to be very careful when we use least squares adjustment. We are more than welcome to use least squares adjustment within a simultaneous conveyance, all right? Because a simultaneous conveyance occurs at one specific set of time, and they all had the same conditions on them. But when we're dealing with sequential conveyances, which are things like tax parcels on here, we would have one deed, which might have been described in 1850, that had a less precise form of measurement, and the record distance says it's 100 feet. Well, in 1980, somebody came back and went and surveyed and described the parcel that was exactly next to it and said, no, 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 that distance between those two corners is actually 101.05 feet. Does it mean that this 100-foot distance is wrong? No, it means that the distances that are on legal descriptions are design distances. They are meant to go and get you to the corner, not necessarily to say that this boundary is supposed to be 100 feet long, but it's saying the monument is somewhere around 100 feet over that way on that bearing. So it's a long way around. I'm sorry about this, Tracy, but be careful in taking distances that are pulled off of a legal description, because the legal description distances are not what we call observations. They are not measurements. They are sort of designs. They are meant to not be an exact or a precise distance. So to get to your question again, does it make a difference? The reality is that the least squares adjustment has the ability to go and put weighting on the individual distances and measurements. That's one of the options on there, is how do you weight these? And if it truly was that you want to go and integrate these less precise distances within there, you should weight them according to some sort of subjective analysis. When did that distance occur? Do you go and rely upon that, or do you allow that one distance to be adjusted more than another distance? The science of least squares adjustment is fairly easy to understand. It's the art of least squares adjustment. I can share with you, I used to teach least squares adjustment and surveying at the local college. We would spend weeks going and analyzing, what does a least squares adjustment do? And what sort of problems could you have encountering if in fact you're mixing observations, you're mixing measurements that have different weights upon them? Do you hold a control point? Do you not hold a control point? Do you allow it to go and move a little bit? And how much do you allow it to move? There's a whole lot of complications built into least squares adjustments. It's not really a tool that you should use against tax parcels, but please, with simultaneous conveyances, a subdivision, if you've input all these subdivisions in there and that's one point in time, the single set of measurements that all came from the same thing, you want to check for consistency checks, please, by all means, go and do a consistency check. But please do not go and take and apply least squares adjustments against tax parcels. That's not how they work. That's not how they work at all. Again, just the distances that appear on a legal description on a tax parcel really is more a general guidepost. It doesn't mean it has to be exactly that distance. It means, yeah, plus or minus, whether they say it or not. If you're out there surveying it and there's a monument that doesn't quite match the distance that's on the description, if that monument is called out in legal, you're going to that monument and then you're going to put on the survey, it says this, but we actually measured this. The deed was one thing, we measured something else. The actual ownership is defined to the monument, not to what that description says. I'll get off the soapbox. So the point here on this is that records they're set up and constructed to provide you with the flexibility, both in the overall design of a record. How are you going to track it? What are you going to track? What are you going to call these things? How are you going to find them? What's associated with an individual record? And the overall design of whether or not it tracks discrete lines for every single record, or whether it combines them into everything in a single record or not. A record is an amazing thing. Once you get used to using them and understand them, it's one of the most important things about the ArcGIS parcel fabric. And it's very, very powerful, extremely powerful for you. Remember, everything in the fabric is supposed to have a record associated with it. If you don't have a record, it's actually in here. If I look in here and look at, let me see where I can go and find this. If I go down to just go to my parcels on here and I look at my data design attributes, there actually is and this is a version 3 parcel fabric. It says that every single feature is supposed to be associated with a record in somehow or another. So that was one of the changes they made, but that's one of the rules of a parcel fabric. Every feature is supposed to be in a parcel fabric. So Kelly question, did you say earlier that deleting identical lines might not be a good idea if you have tax lots? We want to be careful. So Tracy, how would you define tax lots? And we could unmute you if you want to go and describe, excuse me, that was Kelly. We can unmute you if you want to talk about it. How would you describe a tax lot? Kelly.
Hi. Well, I guess I'm a little I don't work in the fabric all too much. Like I'm not pros like you guys, but I sometimes I get confused between a tax lot and a tax parcel. Are they the same thing? So, but I know it seems like our land use department has explained a tax lot to me before. And isn't it just like I don't know. It's like, it's not that it's unsurveyed, but there's something to it. And I'm not, I'm not sure exactly. I guess that's kind of why I was wondering, because I know like in the past, like I've been working on, migrating, just testing, migrating our ArcMap fabric to the Pro fabric. And I think the last time I was playing around with it, I did check that to delete identical lines, but what you were just saying earlier kind of made me question whether or not I should do that when we actually, move forward in the real, in our production environment. That's why I was asking, because I didn't quite catch if you said tax lots or tax parcels. So maybe I don't know, explain the difference.
Let me go. I'll mute you again, so we don't have to worry about any background noise. All right, and I'll try to explain this. So, and the reason why I ask is that we have to be careful when we're talking terminology or what the lexicon is that we're using. How are we referring to things? So, because parcels are complex, we can all agree parcels are complex. And if we look at what types of things we might be tracking inside of a parcel fabric. A fabric is a collection of different features that we use to keep track of land record information. Some of these may relate to ownership. Some of these may not relate to ownership. They may relate to previous ways in which land was divided. For example, in public land survey system in 30 states or so, the federal government, before they sold land, actually went and divided it up. This is what's commonly called the public land survey system. It was a division of land, and then they would take these individual divisions of land and record a township plat, and then take that township plat and sell land off of them. All right, so that they divided the land at a federal level. They divided the land, and then they used that division of land to sell it off. Those have nothing to do with ownership. They have to do with the partitioning or the way that land was divided. And you'll often see that in the things like these sections and townships and ranges and stuff that are in here. That's the public land survey system information. From a parcel mapping standpoint, you need that because those are used to identify 99% of all the land that we're mapping. That's, again, a federal division of land. And then we have private subdivisions of land. Those are lands that have been sold to an individual owner. It could be a corporation or whatever, but an individual owner. And that owner decided to go and divide the land further and sell that off. Those, again, have nothing to do with ownership. They only have to do with the way those lands were divided up. So that as a parcel mapper, I use those for reference. So those types of divisions, those types of private divisions, are usually called subdivisions, or in different parts of the country, they have different names for them. Certified survey maps, small subdivisions, large subdivisions, plats, assessors map. There's a lot of different ways to reference them, but those are private divisions of land, and they want to put on record how that land is divided up. Nothing to do with ownership. All right. And that is the subdivision boundary, groups of or smaller components of it called blocks. And then in the individual blocks, you have lots. So the terminology, as was used, especially in the local government information model, is you would have a simultaneous conveyance, and then inside there, you would have divisions of that simultaneous conveyance. These were conveyance divisions. These are all reference layers. So the original PLSS, the conveyance division layers, all, they were done at one time, and they should not have two lines between them. They should only be one, in theory. However, the way the ArcMap parcel fabric worked, each of the polygons had its own set of lines, so that if you're coming in from there in the conveyance division, the lot layer, you would have one set of lines here, one set of lines here, one set of lines here. So you would have two lines on that. Those, yes, you should. If you want to model this correctly, you should delete identicals. However, once you move out of reference layers or previously divided lands into ownership, and that's why I asked you to define taxed lot, because tax denotes that you've got some sort of ownership in that parcel of land. You're being taxed for that. Again, people call them tax parcels, people call them tax lots, people call them a lot of different things. Those types of parcels, those types of records almost never came out all at one time. It was, you would sold this piece of property and then another piece of property and then another piece of property. Those were not, and I kept referring to simultaneous conveyances. Those were sequential conveyances, where you would have an individual deed recorded in the official records. For those types of lands, yes, you should have, each individual record should have its own set of lines. So again, I want to make sure, however you do it, it's not going to be wrong. Not going to be wrong. But I'm challenging you to just think about what you're doing, because if you're trying to model it a certain way, let's make sure you understand how that model should work. That those lands inside of a parcel fabric, if they were created through a sequential conveyance technique, public land survey system, the lots inside of a subdivision, they should only have one line between each one of them. If, however, there was a sequential conveyance, the subdivision boundary, that is in no way related to the subdivision that's next to it. That was unique. The tax parcels or tax lots, however you understand them, they were sequential. They were not all at one time. So they should have their own sets of lines on them. Again, this is on a theoretical level. Whatever you do, it's not going to be wrong, but it may not be as right as it could be. But one thing I want to go and make sure that we understand is that we don't want to prevent, or we don't want to keep perfect, prevent us from doing better. Okay? Just because it's not perfect shouldn't mean you do it better. However you do that, however you make that transaction, it's going to be good. It's going to be better than what it was. And you just want to keep striving to move forward and striving to understand more about how you model land records and how you actually build them, and what should certain types of parcels have associated with them versus other types of parcels associated with them. Hopefully I did a good job with that. Let's go through here. We just went up through a whole lot of stuff. Hopefully you all enjoyed the workshop. I'm going to cut it off here. If you have more questions, stick around and we'll go and we'll answer more questions once we stop the recording. Thank you again. By the way, stick around if you want. Help us understand what our next lesson is going to cover. All right. Thank you all. Thanks for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this workshop. If you have questions, would like some more details about anything we discussed during this workshop, or if you or anyone at your organization would like information about training, support, or ways in which we can help you with your GIS needs, please contact me at frank@pandaconsulting.com or call me at 561-691-3277, and we can discuss how we can help you with your needs.